At this time, we'll turn the meeting over to Gary Martin as chair and the team to present on the results of their compensation board findings. Thank you.
So my name is Heather Pedersen. I'm the county's classification and compensation manager, and I'm here with Evelyn Miner-Lawrence, who's our HR director, as well as Gary Martin, who served as chair this year for the compensation board for elected officials. And we're here to present the compensation board's recommendations for fiscal year 2017-2018. Budget committee member Eric Hofeld just asked us to present a little information about, well, Gary is here to talk about, answer questions as the chair of the compensation board, but to give you a little background with regard to the 3 citizen members that are on the compensation board. So I'll let Gary give you his background.
And kind of how you got chosen to be on that board?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, hi, my name is Gary Martin. I'm the current chair for the compensation board for elected officials this year. My background is that I've worked in human resources, starting, I won't go all the way back to the beginning, but I started in wood products. I worked there for a company called Willamette Industries, which is now owned by Weyerhaeuser. Started off as a plant HR, and then I went to the corporate HR office in Albany, and I worked there as the HR manager for their Oregon building materials group. They had 28 plants in Oregon. In 1984, I went to PSU, Portland State University, as the HR director. I worked there until 1998, when I went to work for the Oregon Judicial Department in Salem as the HR director for the Oregon courts, for the statewide court system, the system that has the courts in each county. So those employees are state employees for the courts, and so I served as the HR director there until 2011, when I retired. In terms of experience doing this kind of volunteer work, I actually did this job as a member of the committee. When I worked at PSU, I did it for, it's either a 3 or 4 year term at that time. And then when I lived in Salem working for the judicial branch, I did it for Marion County, because each county has the same statutory requirement to have a committee. And then I saw the vacancy posted for this position, and put in an application and met with Heather and with the county administrator, and I was selected. I don't know if I was selected out of a group of 10 or 0 or 1 or how many. So this is my second year. As to the other 2 members of the committee, I know that Andrew works in HR at Kaiser Hospital. I don't know exactly what his capacity is, but I've had some conversations with him around labor relations, so I know he's involved in that and compensation. And the other gentleman, Mark, I'm not sure exactly what his capacity is. Maybe Heather could fill you in on that.
AMR.
Yep.
He works at AMR, and he is the, right now he travels around the nation and addresses issues in various.
Yeah, his title is National Director of Innovative Practices for AMR. So he just closed out his term with us this year, so we'll be refilling the position. And how positions are filled, it's a 4-year term, 3 citizen members, and they're filled when there's a vacancy. We do run a recruitment in the citizen newspapers and online to look for citizens who have some type of human resources or compensation background. So they come in kind of knowing what to expect and have a little knowledge of the philosophy and things like that.
I noticed there's no CPAs on your
No CPAs.
board.
That's why we have you here. That's what we've got you on the
Good
budget
thing.
committee.
Yes, I would say to that point, I think we see our role as being the ones that take a look at the comparables to the extent we can define the comparables for each of the elected officials' positions, and look at those and try to consider all of the variables and the factors that Heather will talk about or has talked about in the past. And then also consider the internals, if there are folks to whom who report to the elected officials, if that's a consideration. And we try to come to the fairest number we can, but in terms of the CPA, we do not, take on that role of the budgetary role so much. We defer to you all to make that decision. We just try to go by the fairest number that we can come to for the elected official based on the comparisons.
All right. So to talk a little bit about the role of the Compensation Board for elected officials, the Compensation Board is guided by Oregon Revised Statute 204.112, which outlines the annual process for county compensation boards and gives them the authority to review the compensation of elected officials and make recommendations to the Budget Committee. And I think that's an important key, is that they're making recommendations rather than making the decisions. That lands on the Budget Committee to do that. The statute provides general guidelines and considerations regarding how the Compensation Board determines their recommendations, including as Gary mentioned, the review of comparable positions within the labor market, as well as consideration of factors such as internal alignment and compression with direct reports. The ORS does provide more specific direction related to the position of sheriff in the counties, and it states that the sheriff's salary shall be fixed in an amount which is not less than that for any member of the sheriff's department. That's a little bit of a broad definition, and so our county compensation board has interpreted that to be the sheriff shall make at least $1 more per month than the highest paid undersheriff. So that has historically been the Compensation Board's interpretation and continues to be up to this point. The methodology adopted by the Compensation Board includes collecting market data from comparable jurisdictions and adjusting data if needed. So adjustments such as for PERS, if a county pays PERS or doesn't pay the PERS contribution for employees, if there's deferred compensation involved. So it looks at total compensation. The labor market currently used by the Compensation Board includes Clark, Deschutes, Lane, Marion, Multnomah, and Washington counties, as well as the cities of Portland and Vancouver and Metro. And as in previous years, this year the Compensation Board's philosophy was to maintain elected official salaries at a kind of plus or minus threshold of the market. And again, salary compression with an elected official's second in command was also considered, and those recommendations were made accordingly. Whoa, here we go. For fiscal year 2017-2018, the Compensation Board's recommendations are targeted to those positions where they have fallen behind market or where there's compression with the second in command. This year, there are 3 elected official positions that are recommended to receive increases. A 4% increase is recommended for assessor, and while the assessor is slightly below market, this increase is recommended due to the compression with the assessor's second in command, the assessment and taxation manager. Currently, the A&T manager is 1.5% above the assessor. So the 4% is seeking to remedy that. A 5.95% increase is recommended for commissioner positions, which if approved will place them 3% below market, which is again within that threshold. 8.95 would get you right there at market, but I think they were trying to be a little bit conservative, so 5.95 would get commissioners within that threshold. And finally, a 2.4% increase is recommended for treasurer, Again, the treasurer is slightly below market, but the main intent of this increase was to remedy some compression with the second in command, the treasury manager, this year. And the total fiscal impact of these recommendations is $35,845.
You had one thing on the county assessor.
Yep.
As Heather noted, the second in command was 1.5 above the assessor. We also considered to arrive at the 4% that there is a projected salary increase that would take that person to 3.7%. And so that's why we arrived at the 4% for the county assessor.
So that factors the COLA that you're
Right.
anticipating.
Yes, yeah. So we are open for questions now. Really quick, though, I would like to, again, thank the members of the citizen, members of the Compensation Board. They have to spend a lot of time looking at information. They spend many hours over the course of a month with us, looking at a lot of data, and they take a lot of their own time. Gary's retired. He's got a cabin in the woods somewhere, and he comes down and helps us out and sits in a room with granola bars as payment. So I just want to thank the citizen members of the Compensation Board. They're really a pleasure to work with. So any questions?
Thank you. Yes, there's some questions. Commissioner Bernard, I believe, is first, and then the two.
First,
I'd like to thank you for volunteering. We seldom take your advice. I'm kind of hoping the commission does this year. The one thing that I think is interesting is the $1 above the highest paid sheriff's officer that the sheriff gets. I used to wonder, well, does the sheriff control what that person gets? And consequently, you know, he get a raise every year. How is, and maybe you're probably the one to know that. I assume that the sheriff has the same sort of classifications, in his department that everyone else does.
Yes.
And they move up at a certain percentage every year, based on, cost of living or however you calculate that. Not that the sheriff would say, well, we're gonna hire an undersheriff and we're gonna pay him $200,000 a year. I'm just throwing, I don't know what the sheriff gets paid out. A certain amount a year, and consequently I get a raise. How's that work?
The undersheriff is a regular classification, just like any classification at the county, and it's assigned a salary grade. And that salary grade is based on market, internal alignment with other command staff. And so the sheriff really ultimately doesn't have control over the undersheriff getting raises above the salary grade. Currently, the highest paid undersheriff is at the top of the salary grade, so there's no further movement within the salary grade. But you're right, if there's a cost of living increase, the whole salary grade moves, and therefore the salary grade or the pay rate of the undersheriff would move, and therefore we would be looking at the sheriff to determine, do we need to make adjustments to the sheriff?
So we're doing a classification study, right? Which could change the classification so that his top guy, undersheriff, could have an opportunity to jump up. I assume that's why we do that generally, is so that you're not stuck in one position till for 20 years.
Right, well, the reason we do classification and compensation studies is to ensure that we are at market. Not to say you've been in this job for 20 years and you need to get a raise necessarily. It's about the work, not the people in the job.
Yeah.
That being said, we're going into negotiations with POA, which could result in some changes to the salary structure for deputies, for other law enforcement positions, which could have an impact on command staff and non-represented staff. But we're not looking at undersheriff right now.
Thank you.
Was Ed or Eric for next? Ed, go ahead, Ed.
Good morning. My question is a sheriff, an undersheriff, and possibly the other one, Chris Hoy, are they still 11 to 14% above their peers in the state? Because that's what it was last year, if I look back at my notes.
I have not looked at it this year. I don't know. I do know the sheriff, when we make matches to the sheriff position, the matches that we have for sheriff are with Clark, Lane, Marion, and Washington counties. We look at City of Portland and Multnomah counties, but the compensation board has determined that they are not matches to our sheriff
Sure.
for different reasons. As you can expect, Lane and Marion County, they're not in the Portland metro area. They make slightly less than our sheriff. Clark County up in Washington, I think, makes a little bit less. Washington County is probably the closest match to our sheriff with the same approximately, over 500 FTEs within the sheriff's office, approximately same, size of county. And their sheriff makes right around the same amount. I looked at it right before I came in here today. So just to give you an example, I think the ratio would look different if we used Multnomah and Portland as matches, but for the purposes of the compensation board, we don't.
Okay. The second question I have, if the commissioners deserve in whatever raise that you were talking about, why don't we give it to them? Why be conservative? Give them the money. I know how hard they work. I don't understand that.
I think the concern
And
is.
I don't think, I'm not looking to get a dinner or a drink later, or, I'm just, if that's what they deserve, let's give it to them. I don't understand why you recommend it the other way.
Well, the compensation board can only make recommendations. And historically, I mean, if you look back in time, there hasn't been for whatever reason, an interest by some of the county commissioners to approve increases for their positions. So with that in mind, saying we want to recommend an 8.95% increase, that could be a little bit of sticker shock. And and not necessarily this year, but in past years, the compensation boards have been aware of that, of the commissioners' kind of conflicting, emotions about being at market, which we all agree they should be paid fairly and at market and comparable with other positions. But then again, the awkward situation that they're in to essentially vote for increases for themselves.
Well, all I know is the sheriff's paid 11 to 14% above the jurisdictions that you were talking about, and that was last year. I don't know about this year. So I think we could pay these guys at least what they deserve.
And the budget committee can change it. It takes a motion by the
Exactly.
budget committee.
That's
I mean,
right.
half of us are county commissioners, so.
Yeah.
but
Commissioner,
We'll
for
hear
a minute.
from them, I'm sure.
And these are recommendations.
Sure.
There's nothing in the statute that says the budget committee can't change the recommendations. You have to approve any increases for elected officials, but you can take the recommendations and there's nothing that says you can't change it or do something different.
So what was that percentage again?
5.89.
5.95 is what the compensation board is recommending.
Right, but what was it?
0.95 was the,
That would put them in market.
yes.
Didn't see this on this.
And how is that compared to Multnomah County commissioners and other commissioners? The
Well, we use
8.95.
we use a market average, so I can't tell you exactly what they are below a specific jurisdiction, but, and this year, the compensation board used two different data sheets. Not to get into the weeds too much, but, one of the data sheets that does not have any adjustments made, based on the size of the county or city, showed that they were 11.2% under market. And another data sheet where we have the compensation board has historically made some adjustments because, Lane County is much smaller or Marion County is much smaller. That showed that they were 6.7% under market. So that 8.95 is just an average of those two data points.
Thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, Mr. Martin, thank you for the background. I really appreciate that. And one of the things that would really help is if we had some historical information, like say the last 2, 3, 4 years, and some of the reasons why. You give us one report with 1 year's analysis, and we have no basis of comparison. And so I feel like I'm at a loss with regard to that because I don't have any way to compare whether that's a good, whether that's high or low or on track or whatever. And so in the future, I'm not saying we need to redo this, but in the future, I would like to see some historical information side by side of what's going on here with these increases.
And I have that. So if that's something you'd like after this meeting, I can show you the last 10, 15 years.
Doesn't help after the meeting.
After the
For what
meeting.
it's worth,
Hey, but not
the-
after the decisions.
the commission does have that information and does review it. So to some extent, I guess we see ourselves as kind of trying to do that on your behalf. But the data is, Heather does have the data, and it is certainly there.
Is there something that I can tell you right this minute? Okay.
No, I'm fine, thanks. Oh, sorry, put that down.
Okay. Commissioner Savas.
Well, I was going to consider actually not saying much this year, but because we have a couple new commissioners and one new budget committee member, I thought might as well punish everyone. No.
Your speech, so go ahead.
And it's not really a speech. I think it's just a matter, I've taken a lot of heat actually over the years for this, and and people have kind of, for one reason or another, maybe, I won't say question my motives, but maybe misunderstood my motives. And I just go back to my experience of first being elected to the water district, and I got into, as far as the employee compensation piece and doing comparables, we weren't paid on the special district thing, and I thought it was different. But what I realized that there was the way the structure is in our system, and I'm not blaming anyone here, but our system is designed to basically, not designed by virtue of the design, it cost increases, pay just spiral upwards, and inflation does too to some degree, and maybe we're a part of that spiral as far as a systematic aspect. But it was 1 week ago, almost to the hour, I think it was, we were in Bend, and we were sitting at a table with other elected officials from other county commissioners from other counties, and this very issue came up, because it's budget time and we're all talking about it. And a fellow commissioner from another county really hit the nail on the head as to why. He says, how can we possibly have a basis to make determinations in labor negotiations as far as salaries and COLAs and all those things when we are raising our own salaries? It's just wrong. And we don't have ability. So if we were to give ourselves a raise, how do we not or control because we have, in their particular budget, they have a very tight budget, and they're making cuts not because of the market, because of the available resources they have. They're in a spot, and I understand the ORS statute that makes this all happen, and I want to make sure that I thank all of our members for participating in this, and it kind of puts you in an awkward spot, and you guys have done you always do great work and doing that analysis that Eric was kind of getting at. And that's your job and your duty under that state statute. So I understand how the system works. The other part of this is very interesting is that, okay, well, maybe our pay should be based on our population. And just like you pay a city manager or a county administrator, maybe it's based on the population, there's a lot of responsibility, or a number of the employees. And we could use that as a number, how many FTEs we have. So you have the population maybe of your county, or you maybe have the employees you're employed by, so on. So those are all things that people kind of factor in, and I think you always factor that in when you actually do the comparables. We can look at the county, if we're to compare ourselves to Lane County, very close population actually. But if you look at all the counties and you look at the pay of the county commissioners around the state, 36 counties, you'll see some striking numbers. There are some county commissioners that make a heck of a lot more than us here at Clackamas County, with a heck of a lot less FTE, with a heck of a lot less population. Now, I understand the design of the statute, but systematically, as a state, maybe the purpose is I'm not really sure, but if you look at it, none of that makes sense. I don't think that we can probably say as a state, I'm talking at the state level, we can look down at the way this all works and say, yeah, it's working out just fine. Because when you measure that and you see a county with 20 or 30,000 total population and FTEs of around 300 or 400, and they're making as much or more than we do, there's something wrong with the system. So mine's more systematic, and I apologize for even my other fellow elected officials, the clerk and everyone else, because I think I'm partly responsible for that 5.95%, because it is what it is, that gap. But I just think that systematically it's kind of wrong. But I'm not blaming anyone for that. It's just the system that we have. So I'm going to go easy on everyone this year and not go into belabor this any longer. But that's my rationale. And it's really about, if you look at, we have nine labor units? Eight. You know, and we have a very tight, this year, I mean, it's not as though we have a lot of resources. And we don't have any policy level proposals this year. And we're facing renegotiation of all those contracts. And I think that we are, if we want to achieve what we want to do in this county, and realizing how many people are homeless, and really realizing that poverty is actually growing in our county, our numbers are really good. That's not necessarily a reflection upon our performance as individual county commissioners, but collectively, we're not in the best place. So I will not be supporting it for the same reason I've always not supported. I think that we have to, in a tight budget, I came here during the recession, in the tight budget that we've had, we're going to have to make some cuts if we want to move the needle as far as the welfare and the quality of life for the individual of this county. We need to free up some resources, and that means some cuts in certain areas, and to allow us and actually have the wherewithal, the management skills as a board of county commissioners to make those changes, positive changes, to put more people back to work, create more jobs, because we are growing in our population in Clackamas County, not because we are doing it ourselves, but the population of the county is growing faster. We're growing jobs, and faster than we're growing homes. So that's a recipe for poverty and homelessness. So I'll leave it at that.
Commissioner Bernard.
So the mayor of Milwaukee, I was the mayor of Milwaukee. I used to get $150 a month. I think now the mayor gets $300. Right before I left, I raised it. Everybody's $100. The first year I calculated, I spent $18,000 of my own money to do that, and that is still somewhat true at this level. We do get paid. We are full-time. But we're also a $1.12 billion corporation now. That's a lot of responsibility. And some folks give up careers, lawyers, auto mechanics, technicians. I think it's only fair that we usually turn it down for political reasons. The last time we did get an increase, we voted yes. I never heard a single word about it. Not a single word. When I became a chair, I said to Mary Jo back there, I said, they must have forgot to give me that raise. Well, it was 50 cents. My dad used to give me 10 cents. I said, it's almost as bad as my dad giving me the 10 cents. I didn't see it. I couldn't find it in the paycheck. After taxes, of course. It jumped me up to such a high level.
Right, the IRS took the rest.
But, you know, we do have responsibility, but it's $35,000 hit to the entire county budget, and that includes 2 other elected officials. That is, we often say, petty change. It isn't to everybody, but it is important that folks who give up or can be attracted to this position have something they can look to. I mean, I wouldn't be in down at the legislature, I'll tell you that, for what they get paid and for what they have to go through. I probably wouldn't be the mayor of Portland for what he gets paid, and it's more than we get paid by far, I'm sure. But anyway, I'm going to vote for this because I think it's important that we keep up with our comparables.
Thank you. Eric?
I just have a technical question. I'm looking at the clerk in your report, and on the following page, it said the compensation board noted that the clerk's adjusted salary appears to be 6.2% below the adjusted market average on the data sheet. And then with scope size adjustments and 1.8% above the non-adjusted data sheet. Can you explain to me what the difference is between the two?
Yes. Historically, the compensation board has used data sheets, one set of data sheets that had all of the comparables and the matches. And over time, they had tried to address where they saw a very different in the size and scope of work. For example, the clerks, let me just pull out a sheet so I can talk you through it really quick here. The clerk, we only have 3 matches to. One is Deschutes, one is Lane, and one is Marion County. And in compensation, we really like to see at least 3, if not more, matches to have a good average, market average. And in trying to create more matches for the clerk, for example, let's see here. So for Marion County, the match at Marion County is their size of staff and the scope of budget is much smaller than with our county. And so the compensation is much less. And so what the compensation board, and not this current year's compensation board, but in the past, they've said, well, we want to try to balance that out a little bit. And so they've said, well, we're going to adjust the compensation board, or excuse me, Marion County's comparable up 10% to reflect the higher scope that and level of authority that Clackamas County's clerk has, just to kind of raise that to be equivalent, kind of more apples to apples. And so that's what this one set of data sheets is. It has the adjustment. That's what we're talking about. These in certain instances for certain elected positions, because they wanted to keep certain counties as matches to have an acceptable number of matches, they've made these adjustments. I think starting this year, Mr. Martin, last year at the end of the process, said, I would like to see what the matches are, what the data sheets look like, with none of those adjustments, with, kind of arbitrary adjustments, like the 10% adjustment I just mentioned. And so that is why we had 2 sets of data sheets this year to look at. We had the data sheets with those adjustments and a data sheet that was, I guess, clean without those adjustments. So that's why we have two numbers that you just mentioned.
Well, the reason I ask that is because our particular clerk returns a tremendous amount of money every year back to the general fund because she runs a very efficient and tight department. And I'm not so sure that that's comparable to other, like Lane County or Marion County. So I guess my question is whether or not these adjustments are non-adjustments are valid with regard to developing a comparable with only three clerks.
You're right, and that is why we started looking this year at just the clean data sheets without the adjustments.
So if you look at the clean data sheet without the adjustment, she's underpaid.
Right.
And yet you're not recommending any increase for the clerk?
This year, the compensation board made the choice to use both data sheets as points of reference.
And are both data sheets used for all
Yes, yes,
the staff here?
yes. Combined with that, there was no compression with the clerks, either of the second in commands at the clerk's office. So that was another aspect that they looked at this year.
Is that true of Marion County and Lane County? There's no second in command there?
They may have well, yeah, most elected officials do have a second in command.
Okay, that gets back to my point about running a very efficient shop with a fewer number of employees.
She has a second, it's just not paid, the compression isn't there, right?
When I'm saying there,
Has a second.
there is a second in command, it's just that there isn't a salary compression issue where the second in command salary is very close to the elected official
Right.
in the clerk situation.
How did you arrive at 10% versus 15% versus 20% versus in adjusting the other two counties?
Are you asking me how the compensation board determined that?
Yeah,
It was, I think it was at the time they've made those adjustments over time. And there have been different variations of compensation boards over time. I've been staffing the compensation board for the last 10 years. And so different boards have different methodologies. And they've determined that, and I will say, it's the percentage that they've made those adjustments is a little gray. There's no mathematical calculation in reference to the adjustments that they've made.
so Mr. Martin, can you shed any light on that?
I might be able to clarify a little in terms of my preference for looking at the non-adjusted data sheets, or at least to take a look. And in the example of the commissioners, for example, that's how we arrived at we averaged the two. What my concern was with the adjusted data sheets was that once we select the comparators and do as good a job as we can as agreeing on the comparators, they're all in the pot and we have an average there. But what had happened sometimes in the past was there was an attempt to, as Heather said, to adjust some of them. Well, let's add 10% to this one, or let's lower this one by 15%. And my question, and I think the other members also, was how do we know that 10 or 15% is the right number on any of these? And at the time I said, sort of makes my head explode because I don't see a clear methodology that we can explain. So my theory was, if we have the correct comparator counties or jurisdictions, if we average those, some smaller, some larger, what about just using that as the clean comparator? And in the case of the commissioners, we took both, and they were under for both, but had been under for some prior years as well, and so we averaged those. So that was a discussion we had. Do we use the adjusted sheets with the methodology that it wasn't totally clear how they arrived at which ones they were going to reduce or add to, or do we just use the comparators and average them? And so we looked at both. We didn't decide we're going to throw out the old method. We just, for this year, decided to look at both. Hopefully that's clear, somewhat.
So it was basically I'll take a number out of the air and we'll use that as a percentage increase, right?
No. If there was, if on either of them there was or if the compression issue resulted in a need to look at that salary, then we did. In the case of the clerk, it was one was above and one was below, and so we didn't make the adjustment in that case. Correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you didn't make any adjustment, how did you get a 6.2% under and a 1.8% above?
So what you're asking, is the adjustment made to the jurisdiction, the 10% or the 12%? They've been made so long ago that I can't tell you what the conversation was with regard to why that particular 10% adjustment was made, because it was a different compensation board. And I can tell you that adjustment was probably made 6-7 years ago.
So is it still valid today?
Do I do that in my practice as the compensation manager? No, I don't do that. If it's a match, it's a match. If it's not, it's not. And we move forward. That is not the methodology that we use at the county when I price positions. But because the compensation board wanted to have more than 2 matches or more than 1 match for county clerk as a data point, they chose to make those adjustments to make the salaries and the positions more comparable.
I guess I can understand that. One of the things I'm wondering about is that if all you're looking at salary, you're not looking at the performance of the clerk, that's gonna have a big factor.
That's subjective, though. I mean, I don't know what the performance is of the clerks at other counties. And so you're right, I don't look at performance of employees when I determine what
No,
the
I
classification
I
should
understand
be.
that, but employees don't return, huge amounts of money back to the county. That's all I'm saying.
I
Did you look at
understand.
that for the other counties? How much money are they returning back out of their budget?
I don't know.
Yeah, see,
It's not a factor in the
That's not a
compensation.
Performance, not
Right.
market.
And we,
it's as much a factor as the size of the budget for the county commissioners.
and I would say if we took it upon ourselves to look at the performance of elected officials in making the decision, that would probably be beyond, it would be, I think,
Yeah, I wouldn't
beyond the
advise
scope
that.
of this statute that, which charges us to look at the comparable data.
Tom?
Thank you,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you for your work. Although I'm the new guy here, I have sat on many classification and compensation study panels through my prior employment to retirement. And it is arduous, technical, and difficult work. And I'm also familiar with elected official compensation and the various political factors involved in that. In fact, I've worked with elected officials where we raised the salary for the class, but individual elected officials declined to take their raise for a year or more or whatever. Having said all that, I think it's important. We heard this morning from the HR director that they're looking at classifications and compensation and bringing it up to date. I think it's important that you continue to stay at your market of comparable counties because the gap will only grow in future years. So instead of 5.95 this year, it'll be 7 or 8 something next year. I mean, it doesn't really, I would just chunk it off and do it. Stay at market, and if you do it every year, it's not that big of an increase. So I would be supportive of your findings and recommendations.
In fact, this recommendation is a little below, right? A few percentage below the median, if I heard your explanation earlier, right? Okay, thank you. Welda?
Just a quick question. I just wondered if, in the current budget that we've been presented, if these increases for all of the ones that are recommended are in the budget at this point in time, or would there need to be a budget adjustment?
There would need to be a budget adjustment. We don't assume any decision on your part, but if all the recommendations were taken, it would add $35,000 to the county budget.
Change, almost 36,000. Yeah.
And my understanding from Diane is that it takes a motion on the part of the budget committee to
Right,
accept
we'll do that
it.
separately
Right.
on Tuesday when we look at all our.
You could do it now if you wish.
Or do we do that today?
Today, or we could wait, or,
I just knew it was separate too, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so that's good, yeah.
or Ms. Peterson was offering a historical look at what the raises have been recommended, and then we can look at what has been adopted over the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know if it would be useful for the committee to have that information or not before we made a motion or not. That's, I guess I would,
I'm sorry,
I
You
was
said-
just suggesting it was offered that we could look at some historical information, the compensation board recommendations, as well as what had been adopted over the last number of years, and I don't know if that'd be useful information to the board before making a motion or not. I just wanted to see if that would be, I was just looking for a consensus of whether or not that'd be useful or not.
my personal opinion, my opinion only, is that we already know that there's a deficit in the match to other similar organizations. And while while the longer term on what happened over the years would give us information, I'm not sure that it would affect the kind of decision that we might be considering making today.
If I can just add to that, I think if you look at the historical, just out of memory, if you look at the work that the compensation board's done and the recommendations they made, I think they relatively have been consistent. So this is not out of line.
No.
So I think the
Yeah,
work has
agreed.
been, and the methodologies is relatively good and accurate. I'm not questioning that. Again, I want to thank Gary and others and staff for all this. But I think that the recommendation is actually, again, under the design, it's relatively good.
Okay, fair enough. Ed, you have some?
Ms. Parks took the words out of my mouth.
Very well. Well, then we can
Mr.
just.
Feely has.
Yes, Tom. Go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. I move that the Budget Committee approve the recommendations of the Compensation Board for elected officials.
I would second that.
Okay. Okay, discussion then, before a vote. Eric?
Okay, in light of the number and the amount of money that's being returned to the county every year by.
I can't hear you.
Microphone.
Excuse me. In light of the amount of money and dollars that are returned every year by the clerk, I would recommend that we increase the clerk's salary by some percentage as well. And apparently we have a range of 6.2% to 1.8%. So maybe we could increase that by 3%.
That would change the.
That would be an
Excuse me.
amendment to the motion, but I'm just throwing that out as a recommendation.
Excuse me, we have a motion and a second, so if we were to amend it, we would have to have the motion maker and the second accept the amendment, or then we just need to vote on this motion and make another one.
Right,
Or we can have the maker of the motion and the second.
They could accept
they
it.
could
Approve
accept
that.
that recommendation.
I don't accept that. I think that's a performance issue. I think it's separate from compensation. You can comment if you'd like. Well, I guess it's on the floor up here, but yeah.
Okay. So that's not been accepted at this point. The motion stands as presented originally at this point. Ed, did you want to make a
Well,
comment to that?
Can I comment on that or not?
You can, sure, it's still open
Okay,
for
I agree
conversation at
with
this point.
Mr. Feely, is that if you, and my reasoning is if you start comparing or ratioing their income or their pay with how much they bring in, what happens if we have a down year? Do you take the money away? I don't think so. They're just going to work just as hard, if not harder. So that would be my reasoning there. I would be against it.
Although we recognize the good work of the clerk, it's not necessarily a policy we want to adopt at this point from a compensation board
Right.
perspective at this time.
And if I may, I would think that in the future, if the compensation board, believes that any of the other elected officials should have a higher compensation, that will definitely be one of the things that you look at in depth. And it would be, it would be interesting to see what else we could find on comparables for not only the clerk's office, but any of the others where there might not be the same quite type of information to look at from some of the other counties and that. So I know that the compensation board did a lot of work this year, and this is the recommendation that they provided to us, and I feel comfortable with that.
Okay. So at this time, I think we'll call for a vote. All in favor of the adopting the recommendation of the compensation board, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
One, me, moi.
Nay. Okay. Motion will carry. Okay.
Thank you.
We want to thank the compensation board for their work and their presentation this morning. Thank you very much.